first of all, I just want to thank you so much for your talk yesterday. We're with Dr. Victoria Dunckley, and we had such an extraordinary response to Wired and Tired. Screen time behavior disturbances in children. So we just had an enormous amount of questions, and your willingness to come back and answer some questions is so appreciated.
Yes, I'm happy to.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the first question that encompasses a lot of people's question around, okay, we're like sort of a normal family with little kids. My partner and I both are on our phones all the time. Our kids want to play games and watch TV. How can we get on a course that's not super dramatic, but get on a course of good screen hygiene?
Okay. Well, I think the reason why I point to all these cases where the child is really having a lot of dysfunction is so that parents can kind of see what it looks like. But a lot of times, you know, I'm assuming if they're coming to the webinar, they're struggling in some way. They're struggling to manage it, or they're seeing some behaviors. Otherwise, they wouldn't, you know, feel the pressure to find out more information. So sure. I do feel like the way that I do things is like the gold standard of figuring out how much screen time a child can actually tolerate, because you don't really know until you see them off of screens for a few weeks what they really look like. And sometimes parents say, well, my child has friends, they're doing well in school, but then you question them more and they're not sleeping. Or they say, you know, my child's getting good grades, but then you find out they really don't have any friends. So, or they're having a lot of meltdowns or whatever. So if you feel like everything's going fine in the home, then I kind of have like a checklist, like, are they dysregulated? Are they struggling in school at all? Are they performing, even if they're doing okay in school, do you feel like they're performing up to their potential? Do they play outside? Do they have lots of screen-free activities? Are you having arguments about screen time? And then things like, are they able to do chores? Are they oppositional all the time? So we kind of want to look through all those things. And then also, are they at a healthy weight? Are they physically fit? Are they active? So that's another thing I kind of see is that, you know, it may look like the child's doing okay, but then they're starting to gain weight, or their posture is bad. So those are all signs, you know, if they're kind of hunched over or they have that forward head posture, those are signs that they've had too much device time already. And I'm seeing that younger and younger now. That said, it's really the parents whose child is struggling who are willing to actually do the screen fast, you know, because they're desperate, they're highly motivated, they want something to change, you know, either the teacher's complaining or they're really worried about the child. So those are really the families that end up doing the fast. So that said, you know, you really want to look at minimizing the number of devices in the home. If you feel like your child has screen-free interests, that's a good sign. If you feel like you struggle to get them to do screen-free activities, or they argue with you, or it's a battle, those are all signs that addiction could be down the road. It doesn't mean every child's going to become addicted or hooked, but you have to really appreciate the amount of engineering that goes into all of these games that seem very innocent. Their number one goal is to hook the user.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that you're saying that is really important for parents, and I mean, I see this with my daughter and son-in-law and their two little kids. I think that we're so naturally at this point acclimated to screen usage that your assessments at the beginning to like really ask yourself about this child, and, you know, do you have to, you know, hyperactivate to distract them, to get them outside and pull them away? And I think those assessments are really exceptionally important, so that people might be hearing these extremes like, my child is not that, and you're like, wait a minute, are you heading in that direction?
Yes, exactly. And then I think also, what is the parent's motivation for letting their child use devices? Is it because they need to get dinner on the table? Is it because all their friends are doing it? Is it just because it's the social norm, so they think that, you know, their kids should do it too? Is it because they've heard, oh, children need to learn how to manage their device use, so let's try to teach those things early? So it's really helpful to kind of look at the parents' motivation also. Because if it's something like, a lot of parents say they need to do it just to make dinner, like it's a very hectic end of the day, they need some, you know, they need to get dinner on the table, they need to do all the whole evening routine. So if that's the case, you have to, you know, look at, does that parent need more support? Is there some other way that the kids could be occupied during that time?
That's a perfect segue to one of the very frequent questions too, which I think people are struggling with a little bit to understand. So there is, you know, my grandchildren love Coco Melon and Blippi or whatever his name is. And the difference between, you were talking a little bit about this, you know, putting your kid in front of a screen, more passive kind of old-fashioned TV time versus what you were saying a couple minutes ago, starting to talk about the gamification aspects. Can you talk a little bit of, you know, identify those differences a little?
So I think it's, you know, to put a child in front of a TV from across the room and have them watch something slow paced that's not animated is a little bit different. You know, say it's more like a documentary style, or, you know, some nature-based program or something like that. That is less stimulating than almost, you know, virtually all of the children's shows are overstimulating. And I just got an interview request in my email box today about Coco Melon in particular, that a lot of parents are reporting, like, my child seems addicted to it. You know, there's something weird about it. And it's, you know, these games, all of these shows are designed to attract the child's attention. They know exactly what holds the child's attention. And then they keep tweaking it to make it more and more stimulating. You know, some of the advertising people have told me that, you know, they used to say, like, they want to change the, you know, the scene every 8 seconds, and now it's more like 2 seconds. So that's, you know, they're trying to tap into the fact that everyone's attention span is shortening. So they're making it faster and faster and more stimulating. So, you know, none of these children's shows, in my view, are a safe bet. I think if you need to put them in front of something, don't have them be on an actual device, have it be on the TV, not with the remote, and make it slow paced and non-animated. That's the best way to not have it overstimulate the nervous system. But don't be fooled that, you know, that just because something's a children's program that it's safe, because generally those are some of the worst offenders.
Right. You know, another very frequent question was, you know, the difference between two parents in the house, or adding, you know, the challenge of that, you know, keeping agreements and really setting that up for success, as well as when you have, you know, kids that are in two different households, you know, with divorced parents, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, that is probably the number one question I get as well. It's really hard. I think if parents are really on two different pages in the home and they're both in the home, I think it's worth saying, you know, for the parent who wants to cut back, to say, can we just get rid of all screens for 4 weeks as an experiment and see what happens? That way you're not trying to convince them that it's a problem. You're just saying, hey, can you just, I know you think I'm crazy, but could you just honor this request? And well, let's just see what happens. And they may say, oh, you know, they may fight you, or they may say, okay, whatever, let's just, you know, they're willing to try it. The video I showed, the Texas family, the dad was not on board. It was like nail biting, because it took weeks and months for them to finally agree to do it. And then sure enough, he did, you know, kind of do a 180, and he did notice a lot of changes himself, but he was like, I was like really worried that he wasn't going to allow it to happen. When there's two different households, I think you just have to do the best you can in your own household. I do think it's worthwhile checking in with the other parent and just saying that kind of the same thing. Hey, would you honor doing this for 4 weeks? And we can just track these things and see if anything gets better. And if they still refuse, you can still just, keep talking to your child, educating your child. Even young children can kind of understand these concepts. And just keep doing what you can in your own home. It does make a difference what you do in your own home.
100%. Another question is about the disparity between different age kids and different brains and different in how to, all kids are different in any scenario. So, but that especially is hard because there's, maybe there's one TV or there's, how to set that up for each child's best health.
Mm-hmm. I think, if one child in particular is struggling, then everybody kind of needs to live as, to help that particular child. Just like if one child had diabetes, the whole family has to eat the same way, and we know that that's the most helpful way. So I think when you have kids with different ages, like a lot of times, like we'll do the reset or the screen fast, and the parent will just say, I don't want my child to feel singled out, so we're just going to have the whole family do it. And there may be slightly different rules for the older kids, but like a common thing is just to say, okay, if you're going to do something, don't do it in front of the other child, or if you're going to do something, do it in your room or out of the house or whatever. So it may be modified in some way. But a lot of times the older children will say, yeah, we do need to do this, or they, they don't think they're having a problem, but they can see that their siblings having a problem. Another group that is a good support group to ask these really, really specific questions like that is called Screen Strong. And they have a really good support group where you can pose all these different scenarios and you'll get, 20 moms saying, well, this is what we did.
Wow.
That's really helpful. Yeah.
That's a great resource. Can you go back and talk a little bit more about age games? Like we've kind of done like TV, nature, cartoony, then the gamification, like those, and there's little kids playing games. So just lean in on those issues.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I am like, even amongst the screen time people, I am like one of the most strict ever. So but I only care about like what works and what doesn't, what makes a child better and what makes a child worse. And in my view, none of those games, there's no evidence that any of them boost development or boost brain power. And all I see is that makes it worse. Some of them might work initially. So you're like, oh, my child's learning their ABCs, or, but then eventually it backfires, and then their attention span's fractured, and whatever they're learning may not be translating to actually learning how to read and write and all that stuff. So I think for the younger children, and it's much easier to keep younger children off of everything altogether. They adapt a lot faster. They may protest, but when you just say no and get everything out of the house, they adapt really fast. So my view is to keep kids off of it as much as you can. They're going to get some exposure in school no matter what. So for the younger kids, really my advice is to have none, little as possible. It's much harder when they're teenagers, but when if you've gotten through those years without them having any, that's like an investment. It's like in brain development, it literally is, like every minute counts. So I just think, when the kids are younger, try to just minimize and delay as much as you can. And then from there, after that, you still want to delay and minimize as much as you can. So, up until the time that your child leaves the house, and a lot of, people say, oh, my child's 18, I can't do anything now. And I'm like, well, they're living in your house, so yes, you can. So, a lot of kids aren't leaving the house now until they're mid or even upper 20s. So in those cases, to me, that's because they're not maturing in the same way. So even then, you still want to have certain rules. And the more time they have under their belt, you're allowing the brain to develop and integrate and become more resilient. So
So
I
this,
don't have like specific rules on when,
yeah,
what age is okay to do what. It's really child specific, I would say, but less
yeah.
is more.
But so then when you get into this, Minecraft, etc.,
Mhm.
gaming brain, um, you become like, it's part of your social world. And it's also a really hard time for parents to have access and see exactly what's going on. Do you have any insights or recommendations for that?
I just think it's so, if the child really becomes addicted, it is so hard to treat. And even if someone has a lot of resources, it's still really hard to treat. They can go to residential and they're, have all the money in the world and they're still struggling 6 months later. So you really want to prevent that thing. So if you're looking at a child and you can say, okay, they're gaming a little bit with their friends, but they can take it or leave it, and they have all these other activities going on, maybe you don't need to worry so much. But if you see that child starting to become hooked and that's their only social interaction, you need to step in. It's much easier to step in now than it is later. And I kind of, even though it is harder with teens, I do see teens can also really make a difference, change how they're behaving and how they're feeling and how they're functioning within a couple weeks. The only time I've seen it take more like 6 weeks is when they're really, really depressed or they're extremely addicted. And you have to help them start doing other things. So if they're not able to do other things and they're not interested, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I don't want to out my lovely, adorable grandchildren and their parents, but I see my 2-year-old Stella, who's just, I want Cocoa Melon, you can change her mind and you can get her outside. But
Mhm.
when I think parents push back on the extremes, and I think it would be great for you to go through those signs of like, that's a sign. She's 2 years old. She's perfectly normal and healthy. And she is opting for that as her first choice for activity, as is her older brother. And I have no problem getting him on the trampoline. But it's if I was like, oh, hey, they're fine watching TV and I'll go do my thing, you are creating an environment that is not healthy.
Right. Yeah, I think what you want to look for is what you just mentioned. It's like that's always their preferred activity. That you spend a lot of energy getting them off of it or telling them no, and that trying to get them to do something else. They have meltdowns when they're told no, or when they're cut off, or when it's time to stop. And really, when they're playing and they go through this high level of stimulation, and then when they stop, it's like a relative dopamine withdrawal. So they really feel out of sorts because they've had this very high level of stimulation and they're able to focus during that time. And then when it stops, it's like the party's over and they're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then they have a meltdown because they can't focus. They feel very spent and out of sorts. So if you think about the young brain, like it's not meant to tolerate that kind of stimulation and then come off of it. Like just, going on a screen and off a screen is also taxing. So if your child's being taxed by all the stimulation, there's not as much reserve left for learning.
Yeah.
So I just, it kills me when I hear these about like really young children just like wanting their show. And I know, like, as I see like friends' kids and stuff grow up, I do see some of them who are hooked and then they are able to get away from it. But, there's just as many who don't. So I just
Right.
feel like the
Right.
risk is so high.
Right.
And it's
What
just,
about
to me, I just see some like parents like spending so much energy trying to manage it. And it's got to be exhausting. And I know, like, for my own son, like, I even do less than I imagined I was going to do because I could tell that he is so drawn to even TV,
Mhm.
that I just don't dare ever introduce it. And I've been teaching him since he was like 2, like what it does to his brain. It doesn't mean he doesn't want it, but he knows
Well,
kind of what it does.
yeah. a young woman was at my house the other day, and she said that I was talking about your talk, and she said she has a 2-year-old nephew who does not have any exposure. I was like, really? I mean, shocking, shocking. And it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
What about, there are a bunch of questions around the issue of using screens as, punishment reward.
Okay. Good question. Okay. So I used to use it as a reward or a reinforcer. And I don't at all now. So you don't want to get into the habit of like rewarding them with screens in general. But like when you do, like say you do the reset and everything's going well, and then you want to see all those things like that checklist I mentioned earlier. You want to see them being physically active, doing chores, listening. If all of those things are in place and you want to reintroduce, then it's not that you're rewarding all those things, it's that you're seeing that their brain is functioning well enough that maybe you can try a little bit on the weekend and see how it goes. So that's why, with teens too, like if sometimes parents say, oh, I thought we weren't supposed to reward them for doing all these things, getting their homework done. It's not that you're rewarding it, it's that they're showing you that they're a little bit more mature, a little bit more resilient, but then you still have to gauge it. And if you have to hold back, it's not because it's a punishment, it's because their behavior is, it's communication. They're communicating to you that their brain's not able to tolerate it. And that's why I think it's also really important for, you are going to cut back for the parents to take steps also, because that really says to the child, we're not punishing you. We're doing this together as a family. I have issues with it too. It affects me too. So let's do this together. I know it's going to be hard, but we're going to do it together. That's a very different message from taking it away because you're punishing them.
Well, I think that is the extraordinary, perfect place to land, because as we said in our lecture, in our talk, we are our child's first and most important teacher. And adding to that, not only modeling the good behavior, but acknowledging our vulnerability where we've gone wrong. The smallest kid can understand, that what, it's a problem. I tend to like jump to gravitate towards my phone or my, and looking at social media, and I'm going to do that too. I think that's extraordinary. I don't happen to have your book in front of me because I'm not at home, but I would love it if you would hold up, you're the author of Reset Your Child's Brain. I don't know if you have it in your surround. You don't.
I have it in another office over there, but okay. I don't have it in front of me.
Well, I honestly, I'm so grateful for your time. I know our audience is, and your work is clearly, the response shows how absolutely essential it is right now. And just thank you again.
Thank you, Elaine. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.